If you follow the news, your experience may be like this.
Most glaciers will disappear.
Greenland and Antarctica are changing forever.
That is all what's left. The heat wave killed half of the crops.
The wars continue in Sudan, Ukraine, Gaza, and Iran.
What? You're telling me my ship won't be allowed to pass?
I'm still waiting for my fertilizer. Without it, there won't be a harvest.
The world could be entering a new era of mass migration driven by conflict, hunger, and climate disaster.
We are bombarded with these crisis images in the news. Experts started to call it polycrisis. It sounds very persuasive, but let's have a closer look. The polycrisis narrative portrays people affected by climate-related disasters as victims of interconnected global crises, as homes, assets, resources, and livelihoods are damaged or lost. Migration becomes an inevitable search for permanent refuge abroad. As a result, migration emerges as a catastrophic threat, mostly to the countries in the global north, and thus requires international organizations to help receiving states manage the growing displacement.
Polycrisis seems to be a scary but truthful assessment of the world situation, isn't it?
When decision makers use a polycrisis lens, they see the risks as inevitable, and they no longer appreciate local context. Response to global forces guides their interventions. And they tend to forget that people who are affected by disasters have their own ideas, strategies, and resources. They can connect, support, plan, make decisions, adapt, in other words, execute their agency. Ignoring the local agency undermines even well-intentioned interventions. Let's see a few real-world examples.
The Gaadhoo Island. A well-intended development-led relocation promised opportunities and better livelihoods, but became forced displacement because people had little or no real choice.
Lama Gaadhoo mihung ekko bala fonaduga wazam veriko fani miharuge January mahuge terega rasham bala mihung huskuru muge deduas kuri
kada kam bala ngira army hinga me jehing gotaka gahal me hiru hin gotaka bala jera mi ko adugo fa mire ni ta mira ka ma karno ne mi dunia umur danu ne.
Karo majbur haya tiga ya sa jama har dawat nahi mili ekam har menne bo hiwa kame mili gaya ina kar sahaba ka ben ne aj mihar genda hoes bo hiwa ai kame mili ben kan udame.
In Vanuatu, a climate mobility policy didn't engage the local stakeholders.
Looking through the polycrisis lens often leads to ignoring the diversity of local situations. Yet, global risks unfold differently across local contexts, and people are not passive victims of events. Even if their capital or resources are damaged by disasters, they are still motivated by their aspirations for a good life. These aspirations are driven by their needs and education, but are also shaped by their family, community, religion, and culture. They can often rely on their unique local knowledge and skills, family ties, and community relationships to access resources or alternative income sources. Mobility decisions are shaped jointly by both their capabilities and their aspirations. Some people stay, others move temporarily or seasonally to diversify livelihoods and reduce risks, while some relocate permanently and support their families through remittances. International organizations and governing authorities should not assume that migration is inevitable, as this leads them to focus on receiving states. Instead, they should recognize local agency and work with local actors to co-create diverse risk reduction programs adapted to local circumstances. Let's see what difference agency makes.
The global narrative presents Tuvalu as a disappearing island and a nation of climate refugees. But Tuvaluans reject that story. They are fighting for the land, their people, their sovereignty.
We must take bold, alternative action today to secure tomorrow. Paftailasi, Tuvalu Mobetua. As our land disappears, we have no choice but to become the world's first digital nation.
Other times, agency can be quiet. For Syrian refugee women in Turkey, it is expressed through everyday endurance, guided by cultural values and family ties.
I recently joined this center so that I can learn something and have my own salon to be able to support my family in the future.
In Nepal, what could become a story of loss due to rising climate pressures was transformed by many families and communities into a story of resilience. The key component: temporal and seasonal economic migration.
In Nepal, there are no facilities for us. At home, we only make $50 to $70, but abroad, we can double that.
I plan to work and then fill this bag with money and return.
Before, people used to be hungry. Their clothes used to be torn. Now everyone has proper furniture, good food and good clothes. People are comfortable.
Climate risks manifest differently in different locations. Local resources, skills, values, and priorities differ. Far from passive victims, people reclaim their agency to decide whether or not to pursue mobility. Different forms of mobility, rooted in social and cultural practices, are used proactively as adaptation strategies. Migration is not merely a measure of last resort, but an expression of community agency in responding to climate stress. Human agency should be a key consideration in designing and implementing all programs addressing the effects of the climate crisis on human mobility. They should be designed for and with local actors, taking into account their unique aspirations and capabilities.